So I'm doing a theory today, where I'm going to talk about this depressed son of a SOB, um, uh, as in a son of a bastard, not the other one, because Garling, very much a bastard. Magnolia, Shanks and Shamrock's mother, angel, or at least to the best of our knowledge, she's an angel because we don't know that much about her, but she seems to have been a very good woman. So this whole kind of concept came to me because there is a artist that I follow on Tumblr. I'm gonna butcher their name. I am so sorry. I will be sending you a link to this video, so I apologize for mispronouncing your name. I am sorry. Diminiuel. And she is an artist over on Tumblr that does lots of One Piece art. She's got a lot of different like AUs that she does. One of my favorites, or variations of one of my favorites, is her Female Rocks AU, where it is like still like Rox's adventures, but they're biologically female and kind of are gender fluid a bit in how they tend to act. Still teaches Blackbeard's parent, but they're also in a relationship with Whitebeard. So yeah, I really like that variation of it. I love the fan art that they've done for the character. And just fun bits with that. She's like Witchy Rocks is what she's referred to as, because she's like a witch in that AU, which is just funny. But this came up because lots of commenters will send Diminuel comments or thoughts or stuff like that. And Diminuel, for the most part, tends to answer them, to the best of my knowledge. They answered mine eventually. Took a little bit, but that was okay. I messaged them in a different way, so we're fine there. But someone had sent them a message or anonymous ask about, after I read tidbits about God Valley, just realizing there's survivors who are scattered around the One Piece world now. Yes, so that is true. There are scattered people who survived the God Valley incident who are scattered across the One Piece world now. We know that because Kuma managed to save, I believe they say about 500 people, is what Kuma, along with Jenny and Ivankov, managed to help save. And then I believe we also know that Dragon helped get a bunch of civilians onto one of the Marine ships when he kind of commandeered it from his commanding officer, to get some of the citizens out of that way. Obviously, Shanks and Shamrock are also survivors of God Valley to a degree, although they were not ones who were being hunted. So that is true. And then it says, my theory: Shanks, upon realizing his origin from God Valley, after he formed the Red-Haired Pirates, he traveled around the world. Yeah. During his journey, he encountered several survivors. Either they were freaked out because his resemblance, after Garling, after the one who had hunted them, or recognized his distinct red hair, which reminded them of Magnolia. And my thought is, yeah, that's true. Oh, I got something in my eye. And then it goes on. It would be heartbreaking moments for him. He is happy to find out more about his mommy, while at the same time, he has to live knowing he is the son of a heartless monster who's responsible for his mom and people's deaths. No wonder, if you notice Shanks, since beginning of the story, there's impression how he looks happy-go-lucky outside, but completely drained inside, like functional depression. If it has to be said, or if the commenter has to say. And Diminuel did reply. They said, that's a good premise. There's a lot of weight on Shanks' shoulders. His life is not what he wanted it to be. Freedom of sailing, careless, just chasing adventure with joy, with Buggy, is not meant for him. Yeah, it was just sad. That life that Shanks had wanted to get to go and just be a pirate with Buggy and have fun and have adventures, that's not the life that he gets to lead. And he knows he suffers because of his ties to the Celestial Dragons, even if those are not ties he made by choice. True. Can't choose our family necessarily, can't choose our birth family. But maybe one day he will be free. And the face he will see when he looks in the mirror is no murderer or no dead woman looking back at him. So I really liked that. I really liked that just that comment there and then the reply. And that made me think, well, they're not wrong. Shanks is very much this character who has had to deal with this. And we saw, I would say that we saw like a glimpse of that during the flashback, the first flashback on Elbeth, not Brooke's flashback. Don't think Shanks is going to show up in that one. Considering the majority of Brooke's story is finished by the time everything happens with God Valley. Although it would be interesting to see Shanks and Brooke meet. That would be interesting. For no other reason than Brooke plays Pink Sake and Shanks gets to sing with the crew. That's about it. But there is this, it's like we see during the Harold flashback when he's at, when he is up at Rijwa and he's getting to meet some of the other Gods Knights, and Garling introduces him to Shamrock and Shanks. And, he's like, you guys look familiar. And then, of course, it's because Shanks is, Shanks, red-haired pirate, all of that, which we, see later. But we get this bit where, Shanks is, we know that Shanks is undercover. And there is the moment that we get with, like, from Shanks's perspective of interacting with Garling for the first time. And it's Garling looking at Shanks and being like, oh, it's like Shanks is like 25 or something like that, 20-something when all of that is happening. When he's, meeting Garling for the first time, and Garling's just like, oh, Shanks, I'm so happy you're okay. It must have been horrible living down there in the lower realm for all of these years. I'm so happy you finally returned to us. Type of thing, which is, from Garling's perspective, very much this genuine thing of like a parent being relieved that their child manages to get home safe. But from Shanks's perspective, it's, it's like he didn't suffer down there in the lower realm. He had the Roger Pirates, he had Buggy, he eventually had his crew, and all this other stuff, and he was happy. And then he, found out eventually who his biological father was. Now, we know that the Gods Knights had chased around the Roger Pirates for who knows how many years, like Team Rocket trying to get Pikachu from Ash, and they got blasted off a lot, pretty much every time, by the Roger Pirates, who were, protecting Shanks. So the Gods Knights couldn't get a hold of him. Which we'll get to see soon in the, we'll get to see eventually in Elbeth in the anime. So there is kind of this concept of, Shanks would have eventually found out who his parent was, who Garling was. And then eventually he had to come to terms with that, or at least to a degree comes to terms with it. That's kind of something you spend your whole life after you find out about it, coming to terms with it. To a degree with like finding out that you have a parent who is this monster, unfortunately. And, so it's kind of that whole question there. So what ends up happening is, of course, we know that Shanks does go to Marijwa and he ends up undercover, essentially, as, one of the very low-ranking Gods Knights alongside Shamrock and everything. And he's just learning as much as he can about Marijwa, and he's doing it to infiltrate Marijwa. And, we know that he frees Fisher Tiger, and that leads to, like, the riot, the prison break, for a bunch of the slaves, including Hancock and her sisters, and Koala, and a bunch of others. And so we know that Shanks is there doing all of that. and gathering information. And he eventually, of course, finds out about like how the covenants work for the different pacts with Emu, for the shallows and the depths and the abyssal covenants and stuff like that. He kind of learns about those. And then unfortunately he's, because he stops to have a hot spring bath and lingonberry pie with Scopper at Ripley's house, he doesn't quite get to the castle in time to try to warn Harold to don't draw the abyss mark on the castle floor. Maybe don't do that. I wonder, side note on that, maybe it would have been a wise decision to, I don't know, smash the thing on the floor that kind of acts as a portal to, like, maybe if that had been, like, destroyed in the fight between Loki and Harold, that maybe it wouldn't have been useful for Shamrock and Gunko to go through, or then for Emu to go through on Elbath later on, 14 years later. Maybe it wouldn't have been useful then because it was all broken to pieces and not whole. So maybe destroy the demonic symbol on the floor. Maybe that would have been a wise decision. I don't know. Seems like a good idea to me. Maybe. But, we know that Shanks is, like, learning a bunch of this stuff. And the other thing is Diminuel has also, again, I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Sorry. Diminuel has also drawn a couple of other images of, like, Shanks and Shamrock interacting with each other, and Shanks finding out that he looks like Garling. So we have one where it is, let me double check to make sure I am looking at these correctly, where we have just Shamrock and Shanks, and someone has told them that they look exactly like Garling when he was young, except for the hair. And Shamrock, of course, takes this as a wonderful compliment because, of course, Shamrock has grown up being told how much he resembles his father, being told how much he resembles, this great man in regards to the way that the God's Knights interact with each other. And the way that, how much Garling is respected amongst the citizens of Marie-Joie, amongst the other celestial dragons and everything else like that, and amongst the God's Knights. So he's perfectly fine taking that compliment. And Shanks is not. Shanks does not like this concept of, like, no, I don't want that. Don't do that. He doesn't like that concept, but then he, like, has to pretend, was like, I can hardly express my joy for how much he has to, like, looking like Garling. And then we have this other picture that Diminuel drew that I do like. By the way, I did get their permission to use these. I had asked them, I had commented on the original post about this theory, and they said that's fine with them, but you'd have to ask the original poster, and the original poster also said it was fine for me to use this. So I will be sending them a link to this video so they can post about it if they wish. Up to them. But what ends up happening is they have this picture of, like, we have, like, young Garling, this portrait of him, and Shamrock is showing it to Shanks, and there's just, like, so he is the champion of God Valley. Yes, he hunted the most rabbits, and Shanks is like, rabbits? Yeah, the people who were the citizens of God Valley and the slaves and everything like that. So not good. And then Shanks is just kind of depressed because, like, I thought I took after my mother, who's like, Shanks has always been proud of his good looks, and now he's finding out that he looks like Garling. And Shamrock is like, yeah, only the hair. Count yourself lucky. And Shanks is just like, lucky me. Just cringing about it, which is funny, but sad. So the whole premise, that's just, like, set up for this video. But the whole premise of this concept is that Shanks has grown up, and, Shanks is all grown up now, and he's out traveling the world. And he could have very easily interacted, come across people who had been survivors of God Valley. Now, given the giant population of the One Piece world, and given the fact that it was only around, at the very least, the concrete number we have for people who managed to escape is about 500 because of Kuma, Jenny, and Ivankov, which is still amazing. That, as Ivankov says, that's still 500 lives that you managed to save, 500 souls you managed to save from that hellish fate. We do know that number does include Eris and Teach, although Teach at this point in time, things being what they were, he was a baby at the time, so it's not, he was, a toddler at the time, so it's not his fault. What he has become is a little bit more of okay, that's not good, but that doesn't, diminish, saving him as a baby. And assumedly Eris is dead. We don't know. But what we also see is, as I said, Dragon seems to get some of the citizens off the island as well by holding his commanding officer at gunpoint, which those citizens may have ended up somewhere else. We're not exactly sure where all the citizens that Kuma saved ended up. To the best of our knowledge, he can only send people to islands he's been to, which at that point in time was Sorbet and Marijwa. Don't want to send the slaves back to the slaves or the people trying to escape back to Marijwa. Bad idea. Sorbet would have been the more reasonable one, but we didn't see anybody else that had survived God Valley on Sorbet. But I think the power may also apply to he can send people back to an island that they have been to. So if he sends them back to their home island or something like that, and he supposedly told, Eris had told Rox that they would meet again on Lelucia. We know that didn't happen, but either she got sent to Lelucia because maybe that was her homeland, or she got sent to Sorbet and then made her way to Lelucia. One of the two. So we're not exactly sure yet. We haven't gotten those full details for where all of those people ended up. That may end up being an SBS question down the line that someone asks Oda or has already asked him and is just sitting and waiting in the wings for Oda to answer it at a more appropriate time based on stuff that happens in the manga, or he may just directly answer it in the manga. We might see something when we get more of a Shanks-centered flashback where we see Shanks going around with the red-haired pirates, and maybe they stumble across someone or several people. And that's where, the meat of this is, where it's okay, Shanks is, physically almost a spitting image of young Garling, sadly. Shanks and Shamrock both have this. Shamrock is or at the very least, to us at the moment, appears to very much embody this presence of a celestial dragon, of a god's knight, of all of this. Embody this concept very well. Shanks, on the other hand, seems to deplore this concept. He despises the celestial dragons. He despises his father. We don't 100% know where he lands on Shamrock at the moment in regards to how they view each other. We know that Shamrock doesn't necessarily, or at least appears to not necessarily respect Shanks that much. But, we'll see. But we'll see what happens there. But Shanks could have easily been just traveling around with the red-haired pirates, and they get to one of the random islands that's not world government affiliated, or maybe one that is world government affiliated, we're not sure. And they show up there, and Shanks and the crew are just walking around, and someone hears that his name is Shanks, he's already making a name for himself at this point in time, and they're like, "You're Shanks. You're red-haired Shanks, yes? Do you know anything about a place called God Valley?" And Shanks may have kind of stiffened up at that, because I'm sure he got told about God Valley by Roger and Rayleigh and Scopper and the rest of the Roger pirates that had been there. Shanks would have been told about that and told eventually who his father was and everything else like that by the Roger pirates. And then either he never told Buggy the situation because he didn't want to put that burden on Buggy, or didn't want Buggy to think any less of him. Because we don't know how old Shanks would have been when all of that happened, when he got told about God Valley and, where he's from and who his biological father is. Roger is very much Shanks' dad, but he's not his biological father. That's Garling, unfortunately. And it is kind of this concept of either someone recognizes him because he looks like Garling, or something happens and someone recognizes him because of his hair color. Because I have like this whole video idea that I want to do where I talk about like hair colors in One Piece, and I've got a lot of notes for it, but it's just not ready yet. But there are so very few characters that have red hair. And let me just double check where I put that information, because I have it somewhere. Where did I put it? Because there are so very few characters that have red hair in One Piece. And obviously, like, Shanks is the most prominent character. Now we kind of have Shamrock thrown in there as well as a very prominent character with red hair. But there's not that many others that have red hair itself. Where did I have that part of the list? One moment. Because, like, there's, like, some that just have, like, there's so many characters that have black hair and so many characters that have blonde hair and brown hair, these very common colors. There's actually a fair number of characters that have blue hair, which is kind of what inspired this list. And then there's various colors of blue hair. But in regards to, like, the, like, red hair, like, for going through, and, like, I went through main characters, side characters, the different crews, the Marines, the citizens, royalty, all this stuff. And I think the ones that we know that have red hair, and these are like slightly off-color red hair or so like that, because like Kid has red hair. Same thing with Kalgara. Same thing with Ichiji with Sanji's brother. Same thing with, like so many of the, Belmer has red hair to a degree. Katakuri, I guess, technically has red hair, but I would put it more as like purple hair, but like that's how someone else categorized him. But, and Kanjuro has this, and, Miss Golden Week has red hair. But there's like so many, there's like only about 26 characters that I could find that have various colors of red hair. Which is still, a decent number. There was others that had fewer. I think the one that had the least, was there one that had the least amount of ones? The one that had the least may have been like white or gray hair, but that's a little bit more of like, well, those characters are sometimes older, but then they also kind of qualify as this. And like, I had this thought of like this, and I just don't know exactly how I'm going to, arrange this. But there was about 26 characters that had red hair. And yes, that does include Magnolia on this list. I believe I put her somewhere on it. And there's like a few others here and there that may have gone up a little bit, but it is this concept of like, it is a very, Shanks has the same hair color that his mother has. That is something that is very obvious when they are introduced in the chapter, at the end of the chapter, where they say, oh, they have their mother's red hair. And then, of course, we've never seen her face, unfortunately. Oda might do something where we get like a face reveal in the anime, where Oda allows that, but we'll have to see what happens. And, but it kind of makes sense if they don't ever show her face, because, like, the only memory that maybe Shanks or Shamrock have of their mother is her vivid red hair, which is fair. Sad, but fair. And so it is kind of this concept of, like, if he runs into anybody from God Valley who knew his mother, they will recognize him as Magnolia's son. But if he runs into anybody from God Valley who doesn't know his mother and who may have been specifically chased by Garling, they may recognize him as Garling's son. And that is kind of this question of, like, whenever he looks in the mirror, whose face does he see? And whenever he interacts with someone who knew either of his parents, whose face do they see? Like, when he interacts with anyone who's a God's Knight or a Celestial Dragon, they're kind of going to be that, like, oh, you look like Garling and you look like Shamrock. And if it's like, oh, you have your mother's hair, unfortunately, you look like your biological father type of thing. And Shanks growing up may have been happy to have like this, like happy of his good looks, and then he finally gets to see what Garling used to look like, and it's just like, oh, okay, I don't like that anymore. I don't like that I look like him. I don't like having these dashing good looks anymore, type of thing. And it is kind of this whole thing of like, Shanks has this very happy exterior that he puts on to the majority of the world. That is this situation, that is like the face that he showed to Luffy through pretty much his whole time at, at Fuchsia Village, with a few instances where we have him getting very serious when he has to deal with Higamo when he kidnaps Luffy, where he's talking to Luffy about his devil fruit and all of that stuff. So we have like that whole set up there where he is like, he's serious in those moments, but the majority of the time that Shanks was in Fuchsia Village, he was very much just kind of more happy-go-lucky, laughing, all this type. Yeah, he was at the bar a lot drinking, but it's also Shanks and he likes to drink and party, and that's what the red-haired pirates do, so fair, but, whatever. And if you want to bring Uta into this, and, he would have been, he always seems to be very happy, around Uta and all of that stuff when, when we see her as a child and everything. He's, very happy with being her father and all of that stuff. And he could very much be hiding this, this part of him that is still very depressed and sad about this whole concept about, like, I look like this murderer, but I have his victim's hair color. Now, there is the whole question of whether or not Shanks would have found out that Garling was the one who killed their mother, because I don't know if Garling would have been, like, boastful about that, maybe? I mean, he may have, but, like, that doesn't seem like the best thing to be boastful about to your kids, that you killed their mother in this situation. I don't know. Garling's effed in the head, so maybe he did. Maybe he bragged about it for all we know. Not sure. But it is kind of this question of, like, when someone looks at Shanks who knew either of his parents, whose face do they see? Who do they see? Do they see his face? Do they see his hair color? And when will he, like, down the line, will he be able to look in the mirror again and not see this dead woman, or not see this murderer looking back at him, see himself, where he has fully come out of either of those shadows and has managed to make himself, form himself into who he wants to be. And I don't know. We'll just have to wait and see how that plays out in the story, what choices Oda makes with that, different things like that. We'll just have to wait and see. So that's what I have here. I will leave a link to the Diminuel's Tumblr page on here, so you can go and look at her art. It's really, really good, and the different AUs that she does are great. And a lot of people ask her a lot of very interesting questions about her AUs, but also just about, like, some stuff with One Piece in general. So I, go check her out. She has a lot of really good art. And I had permission to use these in the video because I told her how much I loved her art. So that's what I have here. I thank you very much for watching, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye.